And that's been the whole focus of that was related to China's second, or it's not a second, its new 5-year plan, which has recently been announced. And what that aims to do is to put more focus on the quality of growth rather than the quantity of growth, and move the focus back to the growing domestic economy and middle class. And just repeat that statistic. They now have 93 cities of over 5 million people, and this is going to provide great opportunities for Australia in the services sector in particular, and indeed in education, although, as I said, that's going to be more and more competitive. I think two recent statistics underline dramatically the growing scale of our relations with China and the growing influence China will have on Australian policy formulation. And Rowan mentioned them both actually, but my understanding is that there are now 150,000 Chinese students in Australian secondary and tertiary institutions. I think, Rowan, you said 130,000. I'm not sure what the right figure is. I'm not sure what the right figure is. But secondly, and Rowan also mentioned this, China has now passed the United Kingdom as the largest single source of migrants to Australia. In the year ended 30th of June last, 29,540 migrants came from China, some 5,500 more than from the United Kingdom. And India is now in third place. Now, if you look ahead, this must have a huge impact on Australia and Australia's thinking. It means that in time, these countries, particularly China and India, will provide a new generation of business and community leaders in Australia. And just as a passing thought, they underline to me the importance of Australia becoming a republic, although that has been put on the back burner for the time being for political reasons. I'd just like, as I said, I'd like to leave some time for discussion, so I'll just make one point about the relationship between the private sector and government. I've always seen the task of the Australian government is to provide a friendly, cooperative and stable environment in which Australian interests, including education and training, can be advanced. Now, generally this is the case, but there always needs to be a watchful approach that ill-considered responses to essentially domestic political pressures can undermine our standing in the region. Rowan mentioned some of them this morning, mentioned Pauline Hanson, and I'd have to say that in terms of racial issues, because of our historical background, we're on a sort of good behaviour bond in Asia, and it's very important that any sort of undercurrents of racism or religious intolerance are addressed frontally by the government. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. Recent examples of problems where I think the government's attitude is not particularly helpful. One is to asylum seekers who come by boat, and also the decision, since rescinded, but after the damage had been done, to ban live cattle exports to Indonesia without any prior consultation with Indonesia. These are sort of mistakes that a functional government should not make, and they do have an impact. Our handling of asylum seekers will have an impact on basically all countries, except possibly Malaysia, which has made an agreement. But I've just travelled through Southeast Asia a few months ago, and I found the general attitude was, you're a huge country, 3 times the size of Texas, with a population of 22 million. Why are you trying to push this problem back to us? And I think that's quite right. I mean, we should be processing our boat people here, not trying to send them somewhere else. But that's a personal view.
Then there's also the question of India, I think, which needs addressing, not just the alleged racism in Victoria and student problems, which I think have been found to be somewhat exaggerated, and the Indians, I think, now accept that themselves. But we have problems there too. We've declined to sell uranium to India, although we're now willing to sell it to China and India. And obviously, if you're an Indian, you're going to think that's a strange and discriminatory policy. It is, of course, related to the fact that we won't sell uranium to countries which haven't signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and India is one of those. But a special bilateral arrangement could be made, as has been made with the United States, for example. Now, I just mention these issues that, because they do impact on the general environment in which our whole relationship, in the sort of bigger picture, can be affected by those sort of issues. Now, I did say I'd try and allow a few minutes for discussion of any issues that anybody might like to raise, and I'd be happy to do that. Rowan didn't get any questions, probably because he'd answered them all. I've raised a number of issues without answering them, but I think the fundamental thing we need to accept is that the West and the United States is in something of an economic and political mess, and while in this part of the world it's a great opportunity. We're seeing the peaceful and unprecedented development of China, India, other countries like Indonesia and Vietnam also developing rapidly, and there's a huge, and Australia is just lucky to be part of this. We have our own minerals boom going on. Now that's having some impact on manufacturing, but fundamentally it's good news, and so I think there's an increasingly good fit between Australia and the countries of the Asia-Pacific region. Thank you.